You unlock this benefit with the key of Patreon. Beyond is another dimension. A dimension of thought. A dimension of speculation. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both waffle and substance. Of things and ideas. You've just crossed into the podcast zone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Trekking Through the Twilight Zone. We are beginning to get close to the end of Season 2. We've still got plenty to talk about. And today we're going to be talking about a courtroom drama of sorts. The Shadow Play. And as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm ready to question reality and the nature of dreaming in this episode. This one hit me quick and hard, actually. It was sort of I was like, wow, yeah.
What hit you about it?
Just I wasn't sure what it was about. The idea of the shadow play, because I was trying to remember if there's a book that there's a graphic novel that Grant Morrison wrote. I'm sure it's called The Shadow Play, but I couldn't find it. I've got it in the
mystery play.
The mystery play, that was it, isn't it? But this one, the fact that this opens, the reveal of especially, so we're going to talk about the original and the remake from the later series of the Twilight Zone,
1986.
Yeah, 1986. That's it. But this reveal is sort of like they have a desk and they have the accused sat there with his attorney, and the rest is just darkness. It's just black, and then the lights, or like the way it's revealed, is this darkness sort of gives way, and you're in a courtroom. And I just liked that as an opening sort of section of sort of like, and then he's been convicted of killing, and he's been sentenced to execution. And the fact he sort of like starts laughing hysterically, and and sort of like he says, "Well, I haven't got to listen to this. It's all going, it's all nonsense and all this other stuff." And then say that you're all a dream. And it's also like, straight away, I was quite hooked on this one. So this one's interesting, because this idea and how it sort of this the fear that it is a dream, and everybody's a factor in this one person's dream, and how it sort of permeates through other people and grows as a paranoia, sort of like, was really interesting. And they're all counting down to this guy's execution, thinking like, if he dies, do we get wiped out? Like, do we not exist? And there were some other nice comments in this about like, well, what about the wider world? What about those people that haven't met you?
Yeah.
And he says, well, a dream world creates and sort of like gives its own purpose. And so I like some of the ideas in this. It was just a really interesting episode. What about your thoughts, I
mean, I do remember this episode pretty well. That having been said, I'm not as in love with it as I could be. I do think this idea of the dream and of characters in the dream recognizing that they are being dreamt is sort of, very Sandman, very, very fascinating, very sort of postmodern sort of Philip K. Dick, like, this isn't reality and I'm not the protagonist, is really fascinating. But they are not really the focus. It's strange that they are given life when they're not around him. I'm not sure that really makes sense, but it doesn't not make sense because we don't really know what's going on, and it's one of these episodes where no explanation is ultimately offered. It just, it sticks with you, but I don't know what the takeaway is.
No, well, what I find interesting is it doesn't give you an answer, but it gives you a hint of something at the end, because he is executed. The prosecution or whatever, actually the district attorney tries to get a stay of execution and fails, and your main character is executed. And the end of the episode it's like a cycle. It goes back to the
sentencing.
The sentencing is how the episode started. And so this is where sort of the remake and this are very much aligned. There's very sort of like the plot beats are very much the same. They've changed things up, I think, to make things a little different, because one of the things that's evident in the 1986 version that I found less evident, and maybe because it's black and white and everybody's just a white male in it. In the 1986 version, when it gets to that recap with that reset at the end of the episode, you can easily identify that characters have changed. So when he comes through, so like his attorney in the main episode is a woman that is his defense lawyer. But then when it turns back, she's the judge. And one of the guys he shared a cell with is now his defense attorney, and so on and so forth. And you see these changes. And he says one of the great line in it, he's expecting the district attorney to turn up at one point, like 9 p.m. just before his execution. He says, it's always in the district attorney. It's not always you, though. Like, it's always somebody. And how the priest is represented. And he has a great conversation about how the priest's face is his father's face and all this other stuff. And that's in both episodes. And so I liked all these ideas. At first, I thought it was going to just follow him, because it does. Like the first couple of minutes, it's like him and the attorney. It's him in the court. Then it's him in being put into a cell and so on and so forth. But when it leaves him, I actually find that more interesting, because that's where you're supposed to question, like, is this just craziness, or is it thinking, how do these entities that are questioning their validity, their reality, they're like, well, it's
how do they understand it?
Yeah, how are they processing this? Because the other thing as well is, like, within our world, when you were little, you have that sort of idea of object permanence. So you don't have that idea of object permanence. Like, if it's out of sight, out of mind. Like, that's why peekaboo is so important for small children. So we learn this idea of object permanence, that in the real world, we'll talk about reality again, but like talk about in the world that we know, like, when you and I finish this conversation today, we come off Skype or whatever, like, I'll go off and we have our routines and our things, and you go off and do your things and routines and stuff. Like, we exist on this plane of reality. Like, we exist. At least I hope we do. But that's the idea, like, there. But there's an idea of this. There's an idea of object permanence within this dream reality. That is he giving them that? Is it because they have interacted with him that they then have that for the duration of this playing this go around on this cycle? I don't know.
Yeah, it's not really clear. And one of the things that I like the most is the way that characters from his life are sort of cast as players in this shadow play.
Yes.
And you mentioned in the 80s remake how the priest who comes to visit him is actually his father, who's been dead. And, so of course it's like father, right? But in the original, and I think that's a more successful idea, in the original, it's a priest that he remembers from his childhood who's been dead for a long time. And I think that's really interesting. That's something that happens in dreams where, it's like, I met a guy at Starbucks, and it was this guy I used to know, and why am I thinking of him? That sort of aspect. But in dreams, often identity is not stable, right? Like, somebody will morph into somebody else, or, and I always have this problem, and we talked about this when we did Inception, and, when we talk about dreams in general, that dreams are not as consistent. We talk about, like, dream logic, but, dreams are not as consistent, that it's hard to imagine those characters having a separate life. Sometimes I do have dreams where I'm not in a scene, which is odd, but it's still, I'm not convinced that this is a dream. It does seem like, there was that episode where the German U-boat captain is forced to be on his
his enemy, the boat he sinks, wasn't it?
Right, exactly. And I had this sort of idea of, like, this strikes me as a kind of like purgatory, a kind of hell, a sort of Sartrean hell, where, you're forced to relive this horrible one day in which you're put on trial. And I have had sort of paranoid moments where I thought, have I killed someone and don't remember it? Are the cops about to arrest me for, like, what don't I remember? What's going on right now? That in my own paranoia or something, and imagining that part of my brain being allowed to sort of create a hellish afterlife that just repeats and repeats is very haunting.
No, I agree. I'm glad you said that, because that idea of sort of the purgatory actually came up for me as well. I thought that was like, this is that repetition of going through. But the other thing as well, there's an interesting comment in this. He talks about, because he's obviously lucid in this dreaming. This is his, the protagonist's lucid dream. And he is switching out these characters. But you talk about there's obviously fluidity to dream logic and dream location as well. Sort of like, nothing is permanent. However, he does make a point of he is lucid in this dream, and he even says, like, yeah, I know this doesn't work, doesn't make sense. I was sentenced, I was convicted and sentenced in the same day. That's not how it works. But it's working here. Like, and he talks about there's other things he points out when he's like, these things don't make sense, but that's how it works in my head. Like, that's how I think it must work, but it clearly doesn't work that way. But there's another thing where we talk about these other characters. It's basically sort of the district attorney and the defense attorney as well. Clearly friends, there's a third thing. And he goes around to the guy's house, and the wife's there, and she's cooking a steak. She makes a point of saying, it's in the original, your steak's in the oven, take it out. She's like, I'm off to bed or whatever, like, take it out in 20 minutes or whatever. And when he then goes to see the convicted man, our protagonist, he says, oh, what's in the oven? It's a pot roast. And he's going, well, no, you're wrong there. And he gets home, and it is a roast, not a pot roast, or it is a roast. Mm-hmm. And he knows that it obviously said it was a steak before. And that sort of is what tips him over the edge, because he's like, oh, this guy's changed reality in some way. Or did he? Or is it just, that's because you never actually see the steak.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my impression was like it's always been a pot roast, and this is just a weird dream inconsistency. It doesn't really matter, but it's confusing how he would know, unless, like you said, he's sort of changing reality, because there's no point at which the district attorney could conceivably talk to him after returning home, given the timeline. So, I mean, how does he know that? Unless he seems to know what's going on in the scenes that he's not there. I don't know.
But he's had it. But he's had it over and over again, doesn't he? So this is that thing of like, you don't know what conversations have happened previously. Like because the other thing as well, and this is because if he is changing reality, there's 2 points to this. He has, and the protagonist has an accumulated knowledge. Mm-hmm. Like, if he's gone through this a number of times, like, he has gained knowledge of these different people. Like, okay, the attorney might be a different person or represented by a different person, but the action's still the same. Because I think in both of them, he says to them about, you're going to try and get a stay of execution, and you're not going to succeed. Okay, so all right, so you know that because you have this accumulated knowledge, this repeat knowledge, but you've also just changed reality. So why can't you change reality so that something else intercedes with the end of this dream? Like, what is changeable and what is not changeable is not obviously not explained or even explored.
Yeah, I didn't take it that he changes reality, so that wasn't a problem for me. Although I don't know how he would know it's a roast. But you're right, the rules of this are not explained. And that is just a basic thing about how this works. I like the iterative thing that you're talking about. I like the sort of Groundhog Day element to this. And I think we both have often liked these sort of iterative stories where we're watching the same thing again. What's interesting is that because the characters change and they do slightly different things, he has that accumulated knowledge, but he's never quite sure, like, what is going to be different this time, right? I know these things, but these people could have different occupations and literally be different people next time. So it's like he knows it's a pot roast, but there's other stuff that he can't totally be sure of.
Yeah. I like this sort of because that becomes like a dream. That's the thing, isn't it? That idea of sometimes we've all had that thing of like you are woken up in the middle of a dream, and you're like, oh man, I've got to get back to sleep because that dream was great. And you're like, well, no, it's the moment you go back to sleep, like you are not returning back to that dream. Anyone who says they have is I can't believe that sort of like ability.
I've totally done that.
Have you? I've never had that ability. I very rarely remember my dreams, actually, to be fair. But yeah, I like this idea. Like there are some dream elements to this. However, there are certain things that it feels incomplete, and that's the thing. We've said this about some of these episodes. Should they be longer? Should they be shorter? Are they the right length? And again, maybe I'm just used to certain tropes. When we've had this kind of thing before, like it's all a dream, and that's been a twist on in several sort of films or whatever. Or he's in a coma. Like you'll see that thing, don't you? I mean, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone that's watched this. I don't want to mention anything, but you'll have that thing where you'll see the exterior world where they're, in their, I don't know. So let's say the non-dream reality where their physical form is, and you'll see that there are things that have influenced that dream. So the faces they see will be the nurse, or the music that they hear over the radio is actually being played or being whistled by someone in their hospital room or something like that.
It's like the very first episode of the Twilight Zone with the space mission, right?
Yes, exactly. There's usually that sort of like exterior stimuli is sort of like interacting with the dream, and there's none of that. You don't understand any of that in this. It's just very insular and very isolated, which is interesting and horrific in that sense of how he struggled with this. But like, yeah, it feels like an incomplete story, which I suppose is the point. It's a short, it's a short story. It's supposed to feel that way, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I like. And I think that adds to its kind of like purgatory thing, right? I mean, it would be less satisfying to sort of, have Satan in the audience of the courtroom the next time through, and you just zoom in on his smiling face or something. Oh, okay, that's what it was. I mean, there's no answer that's going to really satisfy us. It's not a puzzle with a correct answer. It is just kind of this horrifying experience. But what I found really fascinating, and I think the remake does a better job of it, is exploring these kinds of dream characters realizing that they're a dream and then disappearing from reality. And there's more that it could do with that. It sort of suggests a kind of panic as you realize, like, this guy's about to be executed. And it's not just that I want to save him because something's going on here, right? He might be innocent, but and incidentally, I quite like that he recognizes these are movie tropes that I'm watching, like the guy with the harmonica. That's really fascinating.
I think they do that in both. I can't remember which one, because they talk about when he's going to be executed. And they say it's going to be done at midnight. And they say, well, why is it being done at midnight? Well, it's always done at midnight. He's like, is it? Why? Like,
yeah.
And it is these movie tropes, like these sort of like these tension builders that we're so used to. And so it's tropes used in a really, but recognizing them and use them in a really clever way. I do like that.
Yeah, I do too. And of course, that makes it kind of okay to use them. I mean, how many times have we seen, I'm so sick of, the second you overturn a car, it explodes like it's a bomb, right? Yes. But if it's a dream, you could justify it. But I do kind of like this idea of the characters realizing that they are sort of figments of somebody else's imagination and yet having agency of their own, which is really fascinating. But I think the remake does a better job of that, has at least more lines referencing that. And I could see it going even further and having them really panicked, like, we've got to stop this execution because I think we're about to blink out of existence. And then when they do blink out of existence, and it's done the same way in both, with literally objects and then people disappearing, blink, blink, you could have more of a reaction of like, my wife, like, no, like, this means I'm next,
Yeah.
They don't play it up as much as I'd like.
It's one of those. I wonder, would it? You're right. They don't play it up. It's done in quite an interesting way, and I like the fact it blinks out. It's a really good way it blinks out, because it's not like a long fade or sort of like wibbly. It's literally sort of like, we're there, we're not. That's it. It's sort of like, it blinks. Or could would this have been better because he's electrocuted in one, hung in the other? I wonder, would it have been too ambiguous if it had just ended on that, and you weren't told, and you didn't get the next repeat? I don't know. Or do you need that sort of follow up to show in both scenarios, in both the original and the remake, that there is a next cycle, that he was right?
Mm-hmm. I think you do need that,
Mm.
right? I mean, it's pretty clear that he's right, but if you just end with his death, like, is it crazy? What did I just watch? I don't think it would be as satisfying. So I do think you need that start of the next cycle, and it's interesting to see the characters recast, right, in both versions. But at the same time, I do think there are these creative possibilities, especially with those dream characters. But it doesn't really. It's like it doesn't really make sense per se. It doesn't have to make sense. But if it doesn't have to make sense anyway, and you're going to do these dream characters, realizing this, why not really play that up?
Yeah, you could really go for quite a dramatic. I mean, have them dashing to the. If you really want to go for the tropes, have them dashing to the prison and running along, and just blinking out of existence just as they're about to stop the sort of the execution or whatever. Like, you could make it quite a dramatic moment. Cool. Well, I think we've sort of gone to time now, but any final thoughts then for Shadow Play, either the original or the remake?
Do you have any thoughts about I mean, in the remake, there are those lines about capital punishment, which I think are also an improvement. I mean, it adds another thematic point, to sort of recognize the horror of this. I think that's interesting. It's also interesting that while the second one takes place presumably in 86 instead of 61, it uses hanging, which again can be justified by it being a dream and having seen this in movies or something. And then you see the noose fall and it's just an empty noose, which I think is a nice image. Do you have any other thoughts about, the choice of hanging over electrocution? Or
I thought that was unusual because, like I say, it's a really sort of anachronistic sort of execution. I believe it was outlawed. I mean, we hung our last person in sort of, I think, God knows when. I know we execute people for a while, but
this is America. We hung our last person yesterday.
Yeah. Let's not talk about lynch mobs still going on. That's a different podcast. But yeah, no, I like that. One thing they're talking about the capital punishment thing. One thing there was an interesting twist to that, because it's the district attorney's wife who says that she supports it. She says, well, it's one of those things, we need it, but because of what he's done, he's a special case. Like, this guy needs to be put to death. But then when he points out at one point, like the prisoner, the protagonist, he actually says at one point, he says, "Oh, she's my sister. We've never got along. Like, she's always wanted me dead." And so I like the fact that actually the animosity between siblings is also sort of like that catalyst as to why she's sort of like for corporal punishment for this person, or capital punishment for this person. So it has so many little layers. This is the thing, like, it's over in sort of like 25 minutes. There are so many layers to this where you are like, oh man, I'd like to explore this more. Like, I'd like to see how this could have been panned out. I mean, there's one question that no one seems to ask him. They sort of say, they keep telling him he's wrong, but at no point does anyone say, well, when did this cycle start? How do you know this is your dream? No one sort of challenges him on his presumption. They all tell him he's wrong. Oh, it can't be true. This is crazy. But I don't remember anyone actually saying to him, "How do you know this is your dream? Like, someone could be punishing you in a dream. How do you know this isn't my dream and I'm just enjoying punishing you over and over? Like, or when did this start? Like, how do you remember being executed the first time?
How many times has this happened?" I guess that he is the only one that remembers multiple iterations, and so I mean, at least as far as he knows, right? And so that would suggest it's his dream, or that he's the focus.
Well, that anyone's admitting. There could be, like you say, there could be someone sat in the audience just watching this over and over again, or
But there is that narcissism, right? Which is the same narcissism we all have, right? I mean, if this world is somebody's dream, it's obviously mine because I am aware of my own consciousness and I'm the center of my own universe.
I know, I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
That's sort of, I don't know. Yeah, it just felt like, if there's a conversation, especially for someone who's an attorney whose job it is to sort of to question and challenge things. I thought that would have been an interesting conversation if the DA had come in and actually challenged him and had that sort of back and forth. Would have been quite an interesting time to sort of maybe even throw him off. Like if you've got the protagonist actually now been thrown into sort of like, actually no, I just assumed this is my dream. I've just assumed this thing because I've gone through it and I've had the sort of, like you say, the conscious. Be conscious of the repetition, but maybe even make it so he's questioning it going into the next cycle. So there's actually like a progression into that next sort of cycle. That'd be quite interesting.
I agree with you, and I would like to see that. I'd also like to see him, as we've seen in like Groundhog Day and other stuff, have a little fun with this. Like, I mean, I know this is a nightmare and it's terrible, but he still stands in the courtroom reluctantly, I mean, at some point you're going to say, what are they going to do? Shoot me if I run, right? Like I've been hung or executed like 100 times. Well, what happens if I punch this guard? I'm gonna sing on my way to myself because why the hell not, right? Tiptoe with the tulips and everything's like, what the hell?
Really throw it off. I don't know. It would be interesting. And this is what I think sort of like, this is one of those, if you extended it, I think, to a couple of cycles, it would be quite interesting to see how they'd explore that. Yes. I mean, any final thoughts before we sign off?
I'm good. I do think that the remake is slightly better.
I agree. I actually enjoyed the remake. I think there's some better characterizations and stuff in it. The one thing I would say that I really enjoyed is, again, the use of shadow, because black and white and stuff, the use of shadow for some of the reveals and for some of the way they used the cells as well worked. But that was just the use of black and white, and I think it was done very, very well.
And real quick, when he remembers, it's juxtaposed on the screen as opposed to just cutting, which I thought was so much more rich and effective in the black and white.
Yes, when he talks about the route you take for the execution and stuff, and very, very well done. Anyway, so that is Shadow Play, both the original and the remake from 1986. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed our trek through the Twilight Zone. We've still got a few more to go before we get to the end. 3 more episodes left of season 2, but we're getting there. So, anyway, thank you very much, and thank you, Julian. It's been another great conversation. But, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you on the next episode.